So not too long ago, after a very long and exhausting day, I was lying cozy with my daughter in her bed telling her a story. And I was telling a story and making my way, but I was falling asleep as I was doing it, and I started to mumble my words, and I was like, I don't know if you ever talk like that when you're falling asleep and telling a story, but I realized I better finish this because I am going to fall asleep very soon. And so I said, oh, and the princess lived happily ever after, and they were happy, and wasn't it so wonderful? And I fell right asleep. About 2 seconds later, I get this kick to my ribs, and I hear my daughter say, Dad, that's not a story. And I had to laugh, not just because she's so tough, but because there are so many of us that know when it's not a story. We know naturally when it's not a story, when it's not working, when it was kind of boring, when something was wrong. But it's a whole nother thing when we say, now I'm going to tell a good story. And to me, this comes down to one main question. One main question: is your story retellable? That means after 1,000 bits and bytes of information, hundreds of emails and tweets and posts and radio shows and podcasts and videos and speeches that you give and speeches that you hear and phone conversations, after all of this information river that you've floated on through, the next day when you wake up and you have a cup of coffee and you're thinking on the day, what is it that you remembered? What made it through? What is retellable? So we think of a story as having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that is completely true. A story does have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But a story is not a straight line. A story is a journey. It's a gully that takes us into the depths of some challenge or trial, and then emerges us out the other side informed, inspired, changed, better off than we were before. A story, at the end of a retellable story, someone says, oh. At the end of a retellable story, someone understands the world better. And it's the world of your conveyance. It's the message that you've delivered that now is inside their heart. And our objective is to tell those stories. So in order to do this, we think of this gully. The world was like this, and then something happened, and then everything was different, right? So if that's the case, I want to think about three main things. Three main pivots, three main changes that make this story happen. Okay, the world was like this is how things were, and then one day, something changed. And then one day I got a phone call, and then one day he had an idea, and then one day she came on board and changed everything. The then one day, if you hear a then one day, you know that there's a story happening because the world is different than how it was before. That one day leads us on a journey of discovery. There are things that happen that inform how the world works. And down here in the gully, at the bottom of that journey, sometimes it's what Joseph Campbell referred to as the innermost cave, the hardest moment, the most difficult place. But it's right before the second pivot. And the second pivot in your story is that until finally moment. Until finally we decided that the next adventure had just begun. Until finally it was very clear that I was going to take this new job. So that second pivot is very key because it sends us on our upward trajectory in this journey curve that leads us to our next piece. The story is not over, the work is not over, but the change is afoot. And the third pivot of the journey curve, which is what this is called, the journey curve, the third pivot is the ever since then. The ever since then roots your change. The ever since then shows how things are in fact different. The ever since then shows what you are working on now, or what your associate is working on now, or how they see the world. And altogether, this journey curve makes up a retellable story. And whether you're telling the story of your origins, of your organization, the first moment where you came to life, whether you're telling the story of the impacts of one of your associates and the transformation they went through to come here, whether you're telling a story of the vision of the company and the organization and where things are going, whether it's an impact story, a vision story, an origin story, regardless, you want to always think about those three pivots to make a retellable story. And so, as you move forward, I want you to think about some things. Think about the stories that you tell. Think about the stories you tell and ask yourself, is there a change here? Do I reveal these pivots, these shifts, whether it's one or two or three? It might just be one. You might just have an until finally moment. But do I show the change, and is there a payoff at the end? Maybe it's not your own story. Maybe it's the story of an associate or a team member or one you heard. But think always, was there a change? And think also, do I have the key message that I want to deliver to them at the end? So please consider those things until next we meet.